And at the end of that, one of the guys who's been on the board for 23 years, I think, he said, my goodness, you've described exactly who we are, and we have to make a shift. We have to change. And then he said, and probably that means some of us will not be a good fit for a true governing board.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the Leading Smart Podcast. It feels like it's been forever. I think it's only been 2 or 3 weeks. But
Two
Tim,
weeks.
2 weeks.
Yes.
Yeah, we've missed a couple weeks because we are leading in real time this season, which means leading in real time, you and I have been all over the country doing very exciting Leading Smart things.
So busy. So busy. It's been the busiest spring. No, it's still winter. Busiest winter that I recall.
Yeah,
But busy good. Like investing in things that fill our tanks
yeah.
and make us sick because we hit a wall.
That's true. You did.
I did.
We as in you. I actually have
Yeah.
skirted by, which I'm very grateful for. And my toddler has skirted by, which I'm like, every morning I wake up going, is she gonna be sick today? Because it's been a while and I'm not used
Yeah.
to that. So anyway, yeah, we were in a couple weeks ago. We did, many of you have heard us talk about this, so I think it's worth us kind of recapping our executive pastor coaching network in Palm Springs, California. And then the next week, we had our lead pastor gathering in still kind of Palm Springs, but technically it was Indian Springs,
That's right.
which was about 20 minutes
Indian
away.
Wells.
Oh, Indian Wells.
Yeah.
That's right. And both of them were just incredible. It's always cool to see how God just brings all of the right people to the table. You know, we never know. Like we truly
Yeah.
just never know how the chemistry is going to go, how vulnerability in the room is going to go, but just both groups showed up with such positivity and vulnerability and courage and leaned in, and it was just so much fun. So what are kind of your takeaways or reflections from our two gatherings?
Yeah. And that was the first lead pastor one we've ever done, which was a ton of fun. We had a really good turnout, and Dave Dummett and David Whiting, both former lead pastors, helped us lead through that one, and they did an amazing job. So yeah, I just always enjoy those connections we're um, sitting by the fire at the end of the evenings, lots of good conversations. We had some fun activities, amazing weather, and really just a really good time to connect with about half of them, maybe for sure half of the first group and maybe a little less than about half the second group too, are leading smart kind of, they're in our universe already, the people that we've had in cohorts and coaching and gatherings in the past, or current clients. And so it's just fun to connect at that level with them.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, I didn't want to leave. I wanted to get back to my daughter, but I did not want to leave, especially the second location we were at in Indian Wells. Oh man,
Yeah.
it was like, I could totally move in here. This is great.
Yep.
And I'm sure I would feel differently in the middle of August, but in the first week of
Yeah.
February, it was delightful.
And it
Yeah.
was cool in between that weekend. Some of our Leading Smart team were already there. And so we all just kind of had some down days and just really enjoyed each other. I think there were 7 of us plus some spouses. And so what a great time we had. You just said you weren't getting sick. I just saw you sneeze. There's a
I
second one.
just I just went on mute twice to sneeze. Maybe God is aha.
Yeah,
See,
you never say out loud, I haven't been sick, or I missed it, so you're doomed.
for those of you watching this, yeah, you just saw me go on mute and sneeze twice. Woo! Oh man. Okay, well, I was thinking back, Tim, to I looked it up, episode 7 of this season, which was we launched it. I think it was our very first episode of 2026.
Okay.
And it was called Five Leadership Lessons Churches Learned in 2025, Boards, Meetings, Succession, and More. And I have referenced back to that episode several times in some of my Leading Smart discovery calls with pastors and churches, because that board component has come up over and over again in many different conversations. And so what I wanted to talk about today, you and I have both done, even in the last week, you and I have both spent time with churches talking about board governance and shifting what their board looks like, because what served them in one season is no longer serving them now, or as they're looking to the future, they know it won't serve them then. So
Yeah.
I thought we could kind of start. I have a Leading Smart client that I wanted to kind of share an example of what this looks like in one setting, and I thought maybe you could share too. And then we're going to walk through several shifts that boards have to go through when they're moving specifically from a founder board to a governing board. So if you are thinking about what your board governance looks like, especially if you are led by a founder or you're moving from founder led to non-founder led, this episode is for you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. And just like a quick explanation, and then I'd love to hear about your recent experience. But you think about like founder board, like someone who starts a church or an organization, but today we're talking about churches. They start a church and initially often they have like an outside board because they don't have any people. So there'll be some like entity, network, sister church that says, hey, we'll serve as your board for the first 2 years. But eventually the pastor's like, who do I want around me? And they pick people that will support and resource them and don't probably know anything about running a church, maybe have never been on a church board. And then over the years, they're just a lot of times sticking with that original board that kind of surround them and support them and resource them. Basically, just what do you need? What do you need? We'll do whatever you need. And they do a lot of thumbs up and a lot of rubber stamping. And that's not a bad thing in those early years. And so that's what we're talking about when we talk about a founders board. And then, which works and can work. It can also get you in trouble, but it can work for a long time for an organization. But eventually that has to shift.
Mm-hmm. And that is the scenario I was just thinking about where I was with a church recently where they were founded. And what I find, tell me if you agree with this, Tim, typically with a founder-led church, there is an experience that that founding pastor has had previously that they're trying to correct.
Yep.
And so they build their governance structure to, correct something that they haven't liked or a negative experience that they've had previously. And so that was the case in this scenario. The founder had come from a very hierarchical, super committee driven governance structure and was pretty frustrated with just, how there were so many layers and decisions by consensus and how bogged down that can make decisions in order to see a mission or a vision realized. And so that has worked for a really long time and exactly what you just described of handpicking people who, because when you found a church, and Larry Osborne talks about this in his book, Sticky Teams, when you're the founding pastor, you're the track star. You're running down the track. And then as you're running, right, you're kind of collecting a buddy here and there. And so often our board is more of helping us get tasks accomplished because we only have us as that founding pastor or maybe a couple part-time people. And so our board are high capacity volunteers who are able to actually manage a budget or, help with facilities or help with hiring and firing and HR policies because that's what they do in the corporate world. And then before we know it, we've grown to a basketball team and we've got a good, pretty robust team around us of full-time people on staff that can do those. And so where the tension that I see that they're experiencing is like, okay, now we've actually got a really strong team, but our board is still operating kind of like staff. They're dipping down and making decisions about personnel policies and HR policies and really getting into the nitty gritty of those things that are holding the church back from really being able to think about strategy, vision, and forward momentum. So that was the scenario we were working through recently.
I would add to that another scenario, and I don't see this as often as the board that dips down and dips into managing too often. But the other scenario specifically with founders boards is they're completely disengaged. They dip into nothing, not even future thinking, not even accountability. They just are, you just gather them and they get a bunch of reports and the pastor says, man, things are awesome. And we just hired this person and it's great. And they nod their heads and smile and they go home at the end of the night and they meet twice a year or 3 times a year. And that's all they do. So that's the opposite probably, but it's still a symptom of a founder board.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I was recently talking to a pastor who followed the founding pastor, and he's really yearning for more spiritual guidance and accountability. He wants people to challenge his ideas, whereas he feels like the board is currently just like, yeah, sounds good. What do you think? And he's like, no, I know I'm not the smartest person in the room. Like, I want to be challenged, and I need that from my board. Do you find that as the shift from like that founding pastor probably likes a lot of the autonomy and likes just the thumbs up and the nodding heads versus the following pastor who's not the founding leader
Yeah.
is like really looking for challenging perspectives.
Yeah. And some of it right now I'm finding is generational as some of these boomer pastors retire and they're just, this is over generalization, but I think it's true. A lot of times the boomers are more top down, more kind of just like they come in and they're like, here's where we're going. And there's not a lot of conversation around it. People get excited about it and they follow. Whereas younger Gen X and older millennials are much more collaborative. Like they don't want to be the person that, talking to one this week at a church of 7,000, 8,000, they like the burden of having to be the person to come up with the visions but that's what the church expects because the boomer pastor who recently left, that's what he did. And so everyone kind of expects that. And it's just a different wiring.
Yeah, totally. All right, let's migrate to these shifts. We've got, let's see, how many are here? 6. No, 7. Numbers. I got several comments on people thinking that our last episode was so funny, and I promise it was not scripted. Me and numbers, we just have a tumultuous relationship sometimes.
It was great. I loved how you, so I don't remember in a text message, or I think it was an audio message this
Yeah.
week. You said something about, I don't remember what the topic was, but something about, yeah, I told him that 70% is this and the other 40% is that. I'm like, don't think that's how those numbers work.
That was the same voice memo where I literally was like, sorry, Tim, gotta go. I almost got in a wreck.
Yeah. Maybe don't do numbers while you're driving.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, man. Okay.
But actually,
oh, yeah.
just a quick genesis on this, where this thing we're going to talk about came from is I'm working with a church and I met with the board. This is a founder board that as of 3 months ago, now has the successor in the room. And it was not a smooth transition between the six. It wasn't a good handoff, but they were just like, what's going to have to shift? And I just kind of pulled together just from just dozens or hundreds even of churches that we've worked with through transitions of what is it that's unique and what has to shift. And so I made it easy for you because at the top of the document, Holly, it says 7 shifts. So you actually don't have to count.
Of course, doing more work than I needed to.
Yeah. So anyway, that's where it came from. And I was able to walk just 2 nights ago, the board through these shifts. And it was really cool at the end of it was maybe a 12 or 15-minute conversation walking through this. And at the end of that, one of the guys who's been on the board for 23 years, I think he said, my goodness, you've described exactly who we are and we have to make a shift. We have to change. And then he said, and probably that means some of us will not be a good fit for a true governing board.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. And I love just that vulnerability to have the self-awareness to admit that. That takes a lot of humility to be able to recognize that. So, all right, shift number 1 from loyalty to the founder to loyalty to the mission. Do you want to go? Maybe we can split these up. You can say the founders board often exists too, and then I can do the governing board. But yeah, this shift from, we kind of just talked about this, but like being loyal to the founder to really being loyal to the mission of the church.
And it's not an either or. And I told this group this 2 nights ago. It's not like you can't be loyal to the founder and loyal to the mission, but often you're loyal to the mission because you're loyal to the founder. And so let's say the founding pastor's name is Bruce. It's like the board signs up to support Pastor Bruce and they just want to be there for Pastor Bruce. And Pastor Bruce comes in and says, here's what I need, or, we're going to go after this piece of land, or we're going to build this building, or I need to hire 3 more people. And they're just there to support, like, how can we help Pastor Bruce accomplish what he feels like we need to accomplish because he started this whole thing. Mm-hmm. And I think it shifts to how do we make this sustainable for the next 10, 20, 40, 100 years? Let's be under the mission as a prominent thinking versus under the founding pastor.
Yeah. The other thing too that I just want to make sure we're clear about is neither of these are necessarily like right or wrong, but like the founding board makes sense for a founding pastor because that founding pastor probably didn't have a clear mission at the beginning. It was like, hey, I don't know what our mission's going to be, but I know God is calling me to plant this church and to reach this community with the love of Jesus. So come along, right? Yeah. So it's impossible sometimes for a founding board to be loyal to the mission because there was no specific mission. But now 10, 15, 20, 30 years later, there is a mission that our whole congregation is rallied around. And so that shift with the board needs to happen. So yeah. So what we want to see the governing board really doing is protecting the mission, right? That mission that we've now codified that exists, protecting it, stewarding it for the future, and holding leadership accountable to outcomes. This is a big shift where, to your point, boards are used to just saying, yeah, what do you think? Sounds great. Well, in order to hold accountable to outcomes, we've got to get clear on what the outcomes
Yeah.
are. And so for boards to really see themselves as not managing tasks, but holding accountable to outcomes means you got to start with figuring out what those outcomes should be.
Yeah. I was talking to a church or a pastor who's probably 5 years away from transition. And he's got someone on his staff that's likely successor that's, this pastor's probably 62 and the successor's probably 34. And he just said to me, he said, I would not think of putting my successor into the same relationship with the board that I have because he doesn't have the reps, he doesn't have the experience, he doesn't have he needs more support and accountability, like you just talked about, than the lead pastor does. And so he's trying to make those shifts ahead of him leaving, which is the best time to do it versus waiting for that next successor and that next board to have to figure it out.
Yeah, that's great. All right, shift number 2 from operational involvement to governance clarity. So, what does this look like, Tim?
Yeah, I mean, founding boards, and this isn't true all the time, but I think it probably is most of the time. Founding boards they're the senior pastor, the founding pastor's sounding board for big decisions. And so it might be staff issues. They might weigh in on programming. They might debate, not just approve a budget, but debate the fine kind of line items of a budget. They might step into tactical decisions sometimes. And again, like a pastor's like, he doesn't have anyone else to ask. Like when the church is starting, doesn't have a lead team, doesn't have an HR person, doesn't have someone overseeing the finances and accounting. So that makes sense for a founder's board, but that has to shift.
Yeah, I recently heard of a board that was creating paternity leave policies, maternity and paternity, or parental leave is what I should say, parental leave policies.
Yeah.
And that was just a signal to me that this board is really managing. Yeah. And I think another thing too, I think the overcorrection that can happen is, especially if a founder is coming from an over committee-led church, they're like, okay, I'm used to having, depending on the size of the church, 100 people on different committees that are all involved. Maybe I had a personnel committee, a finance committee, a benevolence committee, like missions committee, all the things. So let me choose kind of a larger group of people, but it's only one. And so then before you know it, 20, 30 years later, there might be a group of 12, 15 that are kind of on the board, all speaking into the minutia of these decisions. And so that's another thing that I've seen when we make the shift from operational involvement to governance clarity. It's probably a much smaller group of people on the board than maybe it was when the founder was like, I was used to 100, now I'm great with 12.
Yeah.
Well, 12 people making management decisions is a lot of people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, that's true.
Okay.
Yeah. So governing boards to get there, they set ends. And like, what is ends? If you think about a football field, the ends is the end zone. What are we aiming for? How do we know success? It's when we get the ball into the end zone. That's when we have success. So they're setting the ends and then approving guardrails. Like, what are the limitations? What are the parameters? Where's out of bounds? I can get in the end zone, but if I go out of bounds on my way to the end zone, it doesn't count. What are the out of bounds? The pastor and pastors need that to be super clear so that they can not have to feel like they have to go to the board for everything. And then monitoring results. Just did we get in the end zone? Like, did we accomplish what we said we wanted to accomplish this year?
Yeah, totally. Okay, number 3, from relational authority to role authority. So this is a really interesting shift when it comes to trust. We know this, and we've talked about this a million times, right? Patrick Lencioni says the foundation of every team, and I would say any relationship, is trust. So what does that look like as we shift from relational authority to role authority and still trying to maintain trust with our board as the senior pastor?
It's a fine line there because you want a relationship with everyone on your board. So you don't want you don't just want to report to based on their function. So it's a little bit of both and, but often the pendulum is way over on relationship on a founder's board because again, he or she handpicked them, and because of their relationship and because of their trust in that relationship. And so a lot of the decisions are like, we trust Pastor Bruce. We've got a strong relationship. He's never let us down. We've never had a reason to mistrust him. We trust him, which is fine. And that's great. That should be true on any board. However, you need to move to like having just clear definitions of what the role of a board member is, what the relationship is between the board and the pastor, who reports up to that board, who sits on that board, who do they have connection to on that board, who can they talk to about monitoring the results, how are we going to evaluate? Most founders boards, most founding pastors have never had an evaluation from their board. A true effective evaluation, they may have like
Yeah.
once a year, everyone says, yeah, you're great. You should stay one more year, but they
Mhm.
don't really have an actual where they're being evaluated based on the results of the organization.
Hmm. Would you say we've talked about this a couple times in different episodes, but like a covenant, is this where you would kind of see? I mean, obviously in the bylaws, the role authority should be laid out, but is this also where you think a covenant would be helpful among the board, or would that be a different shift that we haven't talked about yet?
I wouldn't probably use a covenant with a board. I would use a governance document that would include, and we recommend five components of that, but one of the components is one of them is the governance of the board itself. So how does the board govern itself? And that speaks to character and like confidentiality on all of stuff, and then how they're going to address that if someone violates their. So it's in a sense it is a covenant, but it's embedded into a governance document
Yeah.
that has the ends, has the guardrails, has the communication with the staff, has this governance portion, and then has a monitoring results portion.
Yeah. Huge. Clarity is kindness.
Yeah.
All right, shift number 4 from informal accountability to formal evaluation. So, really migrating to the formality of a performance evaluation from the board
Yeah.
to the lead pastor each year. This is a big shift because it might feel awkward if they're not used to that. Curious to hear your thoughts as you help coach boards towards an evaluation rather than more just informal kind of check-ins.
Yeah. On the evaluation side, I think two kinds of evaluations. One is the board evaluating itself based on what it said, what it agreed to, and then the board evaluating, and the pastor speaks into that as well as pastors evaluating the function of the board, and then we just talked about like evaluating the pastor and accomplishing the ends. One other thing I would add in this category or this shift is, and this would be just in your documentation, is having a once a year conversation about succession. And I'm talking about when that pastor is 34 years old and 36, because what happens is boards don't talk about succession. And then when the pastor's 60, 64, 68, you can't bring it up then because the pastor's going to think you're pushing them out.
Mhm.
I shouldn't say you can't, you have to, but the result is they're going to think, oh, wow, we've never talked about this before. And suddenly you want to talk about succession. You must not want me here anymore. Just talk about it every single year. And every pastor is an interim pastor. And so we treat it that way in that none of us can guarantee the future. Let's ask Pastor, who's the successor? Joe, Pastor Joe. Let's ask Pastor Joe because he came after Pastor Bruce. Let's ask him when he's 34. Like if something happened and you got hit by a bus tomorrow, what would you what would you be saying to this board if you could speak about what we should do about your succession, and have that conversation every single year? So the board is always has less than a year old good information on what they would need to do in the case of something tragic, or just the pastor just resigns and leaves to go to someplace else.
Yeah, even if it's just a paragraph, it doesn't have to be this like long, drawn out, multi-page thing. Sure, if you want to, but like really, if it's just a paragraph every year you're
Yep.
looking at and saying, is this still relevant? And I love what you said there that because if you wait until they're in their 60s, then it feels personal. Whereas if it's embedded into the review process, then it's part of stewardship of the
Yeah.
organization. Yeah.
And if it's a large organization or you have other key staff, like at Willow, we had that conversation every year for the lead pastor. We also had it for all of the executive pastors, or actually all the lead team, excuse
Yeah.
me, which was 7 other people. So everyone on the lead team would also say, here's the emergency plan. If something happens to me, here's what I would recommend.
Hmm.
And we just give all that to the board once a year. And that way, in the sense of, a huge traumatic event, we've already got some information to work off of, and it's not personal.
Yes, exactly. All right, shift number 5 from reactive meetings to strategic agendas. One of my favorite topics.
Yeah.
But yeah, we see this a lot where boards are, I would say in general, I see boards for the most part operating some sort of order, like whether it's Robert's rule of order or whatever, there's order, But if your agenda is filled with reactive topics, putting out fires rather than forward thinking, that's a great place to pause and go, wait a second, are we managing more than we're governing?
Yeah, and a lot of times, and I was on a founder board for 20 years when I was at Granger, and it was often, and we got this complaint a bit from board members of like, why am I even here? Because they'd come in and for an hour and a half, we would just dump. I mean, just report after report after report after report. And some of the reports might be, here's what we're thinking, and whatever, and just very little conversation. And people will smile and thumbs up and tell a story about what God's doing in the church and go home. And instead of having like very strategic kind of future oriented conversations and conversations like we mentioned earlier, are we in the end zone? Are we getting into the end zone? Is what we're doing actually are working? Are we accomplishing our mission? Do we have a good leadership pipeline? What do we need to look like in 5 or 10 or 20 years? Those kinds of like really high level, non-weeds, non-tactical conversations.
Yeah, we've got 4 questions here that governing boards should ask. Are we accomplishing our mission? What risks threaten long-term sustainability? Is our leadership pipeline strong? And what does the church need to look like in 5 years? Those are really what you should be asking rather than financial, building, staffing, or crisis questions. All right, shift number 6, from personality-driven unity to covenant-driven unity. So we've already kind of talked about this, but yeah, the typically founding pastors are full of charisma. They're that entrepreneurial spirit. That's how they were able to build it from nothing to something, was because people were ready to charge the hill after the person. Because again, there wasn't really a mission that everybody could rally around, and really migrating towards covenant driven unity. And whether that's, we work with churches that have like a covenant membership, and that would be an example of, it's unity around that. If that's not your, polity, maybe it's covenant around mission, vision, values. But really being unified around that and not just the personality of the senior pastor.
Yeah. And one thing, some of this is purposely redundant, but one thing we haven't talked about yet in the previous shifts is having an agreement on how conflict is handled. Because so often, I don't think anyone loves conflict. Some people are disciplined to move towards conflict rather than stay away from it. But most of us are probably not. Most of us avoid it. But having just a way to approach conflict. Conflict could be someone violates our confidentiality agreement and something got out. Conflict could be just the way someone behaved in a meeting. I saw this happen a few times in person where it's just, man, that is unacceptable behavior, the way that bullying or just a demeaning kind of conversation. And so that needs to be addressed. And so how do we do that? Who does that? What does that look like? And that's just other stuff that you document. And so it's like you just follow your procedures if something like that happens.
Yeah, totally. All right, shift number 7, last but not least.
There you go.
Wow, it's
That was
Friday. My brain. From founder's story to institutional sustainability. So you say that this is the hardest shift that boards have to make. Why do you think that is?
It's because of this belief that the only reason all of this is happening is because of Pastor Bruce. He started it from the beginning. Every time we had to do something big, he sold it to our congregation. Every time we needed to raise millions of dollars, he raised millions of dollars. Every time we had to go through a tough staff shift or bring someone on the staff or do a partnership with a school, whatever. It's like he led through all this. This works because of who's at the helm. And that's going to be true with any organization that has a leader. It's working but it's got to be more than that. It's got to be sustainable for the future. It's got to be built again around your core beliefs and your mission and clear documentation in a sense of this isn't going to. Often a founder might be at his church for 25 plus years, 25, 40, 45 years. You're probably not going to have another 25 to 40 year pastor. It just doesn't happen very often past the founder. You might have 4 pastors over the next 25 years or something like that. So you need to have some things, some core beliefs, core statements, core processes that outlive the subsequent pastors and that help the organization succeed because of what it is, not just because the founder is the one who thought of it.
Yeah. I think this also starts with the founder. If the founder is still there, sometimes that, like the scenario you gave earlier, the transition's already happened. The founder is no longer involved. But if you are a founding pastor listening to this, one of the best things you can do is for you to own this now. Well, you gave that second scenario a minute ago where
Yeah.
you were saying the outgoing pastor is, I want to change this so that the successor doesn't have to inherit this. And
Yep.
that is so cool because when we talked about this in season 1 around succession, but the identity piece of that outgoing pastor, especially if they're the founding pastor, is the biggest hurdle to an effective succession happening. And I think it starts with this because our pride is caught up in, oh, this has only been successful because of me or, because of my superpowers. But really to shift your identity from the current leading to your identity of setting up the church for a long-term legacy of impact in the community.
Yeah.
And that mindset shift, I think for it to go as well as possible needs to happen in the founding pastor's mindset now before they leave in a perfect scenario, right?
Yep. Yep.
That's awesome. Well, those were 7 shifts. Hope that they encourage you as you're thinking about identify first, and maybe I encourage leadership teams to think, where are we in the life cycle stage? To use Larry Osborne's analogy again, like track star to golf buddies to basketball team to football team. Where are you in that life cycle? And then ask yourself, how is your board governing? Are you more managing or are you really governing? And what shifts need to happen in order to help you migrate through each of those life cycles as a church?
Good.
All right, you ready for a quick fun session?
Yes. I love to have fun, Holly.
Okay. You're so excited.
I'm excited.
All right. So you and I have both been on a plane a lot recently. And I would like to hear from you because I actually don't know the answer to this. I think I have a guess, but I'm surprised I don't know the answer to this. Where is your favorite seat on an airplane? Like when you get to choose your seat, where do you like
7F.
to choose? 7F. Okay. Okay, so that's 7th row, and then F is by the window, right?
Yeah. Love window seats. Always sit by the window. The exception to that is a super short flight. I'll sit on an aisle. But I'm just still mystified by the fact that we get to be 35,000 feet in the air, flying across the country, and 3 hours later we're sitting 2,000 miles away in a meeting. It's just amazing to me. So I love looking out the window.
That's awesome.
And 7F. So on United Airlines, 7 is always the row behind first class. And so if I do get bumped up, then it's easy to get out and go up there. Sometimes they bump you after you're already sitting down. But then most of the time I don't get bumped up. So I'm sitting there, but I'm the first on the first row out of the plane. I want to get out as fast as I can after first class gets out.
Yeah, that's still preferred seating because I am not in the same S of you. I don't know. Yeah,
You just have to get to gold. You have to fly like 20 times. That's it.
Yeah.
And then you get free economy plus seating.
If you know me, you know that I have been a Southwest loyalist for many years, my whole adult life.
I feel a shift coming on. I feel a shift.
Yeah, well, I put up some of my most popular content on my Instagram lately was my rant about Southwest Airlines caving in and becoming like every other airline. And so I flew them for the first time since they've rolled out the changes. And yeah, there's really no reason well, I will say the only reason now that I can think of to choose Southwest. Okay, 2 reasons to choose Southwest over United currently. One is I am equidistant from the IAH and Hobby, which here in Houston, Hobby is the airport that Southwest only flies out of that one. And I prefer that airport. So that's one reason. The second reason is companion pass. So I'll be eligible here in a little bit for companion pass. And that is especially having a kid, that is pretty compelling.
Yeah.
United does not offer it. So those are the only 2. I used to have like a whole host of reasons. Unfortunately, yeah. So I will say for me, what's interesting is I actually prefer an aisle seat because I don't like having to climb in and out of people. I like the autonomy of being able to get up and go to the bathroom whenever I want and not have to feel like I'm, bothering people. And sometimes it can be quicker to get off the plane. When I fly United, I'm all the way in the back. So it's
Gotta
not
be loyal. You'll move your way up.
So anyway, that's
another
so
reason
classic.
Not an aisle seat is I always have my laptop out and the carts and the people that bump your elbow and then it bumps your laptop. And if you have a drink also on the tray, and it's bumping, your laptop bumps the drink. It's just a little scary. Whereas a window, you can snug up against the window, even if you have someone next to you that's using the armrest you're not going to get bumped.
Yeah.
So
That is another thing I do think that makes sense that Southwest does is they don't have those big carts. It's the flight
yeah,
attendant. That I don't know why the other airlines have not adopted that yet. It makes no sense to me why they have these massive metal carts where no one can go past and go to the bathroom. Whereas Southwest, I think, has figured that out to be very lean and just they have a tray, they take the orders, they go fill the orders, they bring them back, and they order the next section.
yeah,
Makes a lot of sense to me. So, anyway,
yeah.
you and I could talk about airlines for hours. So, that was our fun segment. All right, everybody, we talked about this at the beginning, but we have one more executive pastor gathering coming up at the end of February. By the time this, oh no, it'll be too late. By the time this comes out, I
Is this
just
not coming
realized,
out on the upcoming Tuesday?
yeah,
Because if
this is
so,
coming
there's
out this Tuesday. So,
yeah, there'll still
yeah,
be time. It'll be tight. I don't know if we can get you a room, but we can try.
Teresa will probably tell us that,
Yeah.
yeah, maybe you might have to sweet talk Teresa. But anyway, we are gathering with our executive pastor gathering in Clearwater, Florida. So if you want to get in on that as quickly as possible, the day this comes out, you can do that at leadingsmart.com, click on gatherings. But we'll also have an opportunity there for you to fill out a form to be contacted when we do open up gates, the virtual gates
The virtual
for
gates for future.
2027
Yeah.
dates. And then if you want help with board governance, succession planning, strategic advising, that's what our team does. You can set up a free discovery call with me at leadingsmart.com. Click on Let's Talk, and you can book a time on my calendar. So, oh, I also wanted to let everybody know because I know probably a lot of people listening are going to be at Exponential Conference in Florida, which is a great church conference, especially if you are or have been a church plant. Tim and me and Dave Dummett from our team will be there. So would love to see you there and come find us. We're each leading a workshop and then have a joint workshop that we're doing in the leadership development track. So anything else you can think of, Tim?
I don't think so. I think that's mid-March, something like that, or early March, maybe. It's on the
No, it's like in
exponential.org.
yeah, it's in the teens of March.
The teens of March. All right. Well said.
All right, everybody. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time on the Leading Smart Podcast.
Bye.